Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Blob. Fred Dukes, aka Blob, made his comic book debut back in Uncanny X-Men issue 3, and he got his powers when he was just a young man. He often looked at himself as this extra, super strong freak of nature at this point, just this giant, strong man whose temper often got the best of him. The X-Men met him at a carnival where he was using his might and muscle just to get by. And then when Scott Summers approached Blob and asked if he'd heard about the X-Men, he responds with, "Oh, those jerky juveniles in the corny costumes? Yeah, I've heard of those guys." First of all, rude. So he goes back and Charles has him tested. He has him pulling these massive chains so hard that he breaks these chains like King Kong. And then he starts to make a break for it, launching away any X-Men member in his path. So now he's gone, but now he knows everybody's real identity because he was there for a bit and then he's like, yeah, you know what? I'm out of here. So Charles had to track him down and then erase his memory from his brain. I had to start with Blob because he was so close to being a member. So much potential, and then he ended up picking the wrong team 3 issues later. But we had him for a bit. And before we continue on with this list, if you guys haven't already, please go ahead and give us a thumbs up because it helps our channel out so much. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now back to our list. Number 9, Vulcan. He named himself after the Roman god of fire, but Vulcan's real identity was that of Gabriel Summers. He was born after Cyclops and Havoc. Well, not really born, he was surgically removed from his mother's body and placed in an incubator accelerator, aged to be at his prime, and then sent back to Earth to work for Divan Shikari. He then escaped and was found by Moira McTaggart with no memories of who he is or where he came from. He was impressing Charles quite a bit and all he wanted to do was learn his mutant abilities. Sounds like the dream student. So Charles needed help from him and other newcomers to find the remaining X-Men after most of them had been depowered from the Scarlet Witch. So Charles put him in this danger room purely made of Charles' thoughts as a training exercise to get them sharp in a short amount of time. So inside it feels like months of training, but in actuality it's only a few hours. Then Vulcan and his new team were sent to Krakoa to rescue the original X-Men. But Vulcan revealed to Scott that Xavier sacrificed his own brother to save him. And then Kid Vulcan's true origins are shown, and in the next issue of Deadly Genesis, he's unleashed. Number 8, Frenzy. Joanna Cargill made her first comic book debut in X Factor issue 4 when she accidentally punched her father so hard that her hand went through his chest. Now her father was by no means a good person at all, but I mean doesn't mean he deserved to go out like that. Plus finding out you're a mutant at that time in that way must have been pretty traumatizing. She became known as Frenzy and she joined the Allegiance of Evil. After the Acolytes disbanded, Joanna became an ambassador for Genosha and stood by Magneto until she was captured by the US government in order to learn more about Magneto. But she didn't talk. She kept her mouth shut until Jean Grey entered and freed her, giving her the option to join the X-Men the easy way or the hard way. Jean used the hard way and then Frenzy's entire attitude was changed just like that. Her brain was different. Now her personality was campy, it was awkward, and not nearly as confident as before. But she did help the X-Men find Magneto's base. She was a team member even if it was forced and awkward. After Magneto's defeat, her mind control was released and she rejoined the Acolytes and left the X-Mansion. Again, a little brief, but it still counts. Number 7, Caliban. An albino mutant and a former member of the Morlocks. Caliban made his first comic book appearance in Uncanny X-Men 148. He has the ability to track down any mutant, and he actually sacrifices himself in Logan, where he was played by the hilarious Stephen Merchant. Great film. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's on Disney Plus now, rated R. So good. He was originally an ally to the X-Men, so I'm gonna count him as a hero who switched over to the dark side. Because once he became a tracker for Apocalypse in X Factor issue 24, titled The Fall of Mutants. So Apocalypse gave him extra strength and renamed him Hellhound, taking the place of the Horseman Death. Number 6, Gazer. Making his first debut in X-Men Volume 2, issue 169, Gazer met the X-Men when a Golgotha invasion was threatening Earth. He was alone on a NASA space station, and due to his mutant abilities, he was the only person that could withstand high levels of radiation. So when these creatures approached Earth, he told Emma Frost, and then the X-Men joined him in space on his observation platform. Again, he wasn't knighted with a sword and deemed an official X-Men or anything like that, no. But he's a mutant who works in space to keep our planet safe, and he calls Emma Frost. So call him what you want, but this man's a hero. He's a bored, lonely hero up in space. He's definitely an X-Men. I'll say he's an X-Men. But then after the events of M-Day, things changed, and so did his morals. He lost his abilities, so now he was experiencing horrible radiation sickness, so he decided to literally jump ship, wanting to go out there instead of passing away alone in here. Fair, I mean, sad, but also makes a lick of sense. It's kind of like George Clooney in Gravity, just floating out in space.
Houston, I've lost visual, Dr. Stone.
But while he was drifting in space like a hero, Apocalypse came on by to save his day. thus becoming the Horseman War. Number 5, Sunfire. He made his first debut in X-Men issue 64. Shiro Yashida's mother passed away of radiation poisoning when he was still young, and Shiro was raised by his uncle Tomo to hate the West and return to Japan to their imperial days. So he trained for years and attacked America when the X-Men pulled up to put a stop to it. So Sunfire ended up taking out his uncle and returning to Japan, but then he was sent to destroy an American cargo ship, but then Namor turned him for good. Now he was Japan's protector. When most of the X-Men were captured by Krakoa, Sunfire was recruited by Charles to help. He was named as one of the mythical 12, representing the power of nature alongside Storm and Iceman. So far, so good. But then during a battle with Deathstrike later on, he was presumed dead after an altercation, and the X-Men couldn't find his body. But you know who did? Apocalypse. Yep. He was turning him into the Horseman Famine, and he kind of had control over it, kind of. See, he wanted to stay and see if he could help out Gazer, who I'd previously mentioned up there, but they were sadly both turned by the end of the day. At least he tried. Number 4, Forge. Forge is a mutant and a tribal shaman who made his debut in Uncanny X-Men 184. He's known for creating these amazing inventions, and before he worked for the X-Men, he was fighting in the Vietnam War, where he would use dark magic to save himself. He rejected the life of a shaman in order to serve. He was able to create advanced cybernetic prosthetics to replace his missing limbs during all these battles. And then after the events of M-Day, Forge searched the multiverse to try and find other mutants. Then there was an alternate world of mutants at war with a group of artificial mutants that were created by Forge. So he was bad. He's a bad guy in another world. Brilliant mind, but it can get him into a little bit of trouble in some of these stories, especially the Ultimate Universe, where he literally sided with Magneto. And during this, he actually created a power amplifier for Magneto to use in order to flip the Earth's magnetic poles and take out every living being on the planet. So thanks, Forge. Really cool. You couldn't have made like an iPhone 14. Cool, that's good too. Number 3, Storm. Aurora Monroe made her first debut in Giant Size X-Men issue 1, and she's one of the more popular members of the X-Men, being portrayed by Halle Berry and Alexandra Shipp. She was recruited by Charles, and she joined the team to save other original members from Krakoa. She was appointed leader after several years of work, and in X-Men Apocalypse, we see her recruited as a Horseman. But by the end of the movie, she betrays him and joins the X-Men because she's not a fan of how he treats her idol, Mystique. It's probably the only time we'll see Storm evil, at least in this live action run. But it was still pretty entertaining. It was nice to see a younger version of Storm, and then of course be influenced by Apocalypse. It was kind of cool. I could do with more bad Storm. I mean, you know, just for a little bit. Number 2, Lord Xavier. We can't forget this one, okay? He's also known as the Witch King, and you can see him in Volume 2, Issue 9 of Extreme X-Men. So the Witch King ruled over Genosha and sports a look that is very menacing, maybe Power Rangers. It's pretty badass, but also kind of Power Rangers. It's right in the middle. He has an army of orcs and beasts on top of his already spectacular abilities. And in this issue, we also see a few upgrades to the Professor, like concussive energy blast for starters. And in the opening of the story, we see him effortlessly take down invaders with machines, so it doesn't matter how you roll up to this fight, Lord Xavier, Witch King of Genosha, will take you down with his armies of orcs and beasts. Probably one of the cooler versions. Finally, number 1, Deadpool. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. It's such a blast to read, and I had to include it in here because it's so good. It's so Deadpool. The issue was released in August 2012, and just the front cover, you know what you're getting into. So what's the story here? What are we getting into? What happened to Wade? Well, his mouth wasn't sewn shut, and he didn't have swords for hands. Nothing like that this time, no. The X-Men put Wade into the Ravencroft Asylum in attempts to heal his insanity. The doctor, Psycho Man, was brainwashing Wade in hopes to shut down all of his inner voices, which worked, but now all these voices were replaced with voices that were encouraging him to kill everybody in the Marvel Universe. So it went from bad to worse, and of course, Wade's the one to do it. Right off the bat, the series draws you in. I mean, it opens with the Fantastic Four facing off with Wade. Reed gets left all rubbery and left for dead and lifeless. It's really gruesome, but also really fun. Not for the faint of heart, but definitely fun, and obviously super gory. Well, there you have it, guys. Which of these X-Men gone bad are your favorite? It's hard to read the comics where Quicksilver is such a jerk, and then in the X-Men movies, he's like the best part. So it's weird. These stories can be a little confusing with certain characters and different ideas and TV shows and movies. God, I can't imagine how confusing WandaVision is for casual moviegoers, especially now with Quicksilver. Oh my God.
In at number 10, Mockingbird. In 2016, the female superhero known as Mockingbird was depicted on a comic book cover wearing a t-shirt that read, "Ask me about my feminist agenda." This was issue number 8 of her series run, but that one cover was followed with harassment on Twitter. The series writer Chelsea Kane felt the brunt of this attack, and she told the media that the comics industry is the first scene in her writing career which has pushed pushed her to block Twitter users based on their incendiary or threatening messages, adding, "My day job is writing thrillers, bestsellers, sold millions of copies, never had to block people until I started writing comics." The main backlash came from the group I mentioned earlier, and the opposition to this is saying that Kane is exploiting basic virtue signaling to garner the attention and cash of social justice warriors. Even Brian Michael Bendis weighed in by tweeting at Chelsea and saying that it's not comics, to which she replied, "Yeah, it is. We can talk more in person, but yeah, it is. At the end of the day, if you don't like it, don't buy it. Just walk away." In at number 9, Desmond PHINEAS. When Marvel announced a new mutant villain in the Domino solo series, we all had our hopes up, but sadly it turned out to be one big flop. Remember in Deadpool 2, when he was putting together the X-Force, Wilson tells Domino that being lucky isn't a superpower, and turns out he was right. Domino and Desmond are linked, so whenever Domino experienced this luck power, Desmond suffered. That's the new brilliant mutant villain that Marvel concocted for its readers. At a young age, the boy suffered from broken limbs for no apparent reason, and though he had an inkling that it was caused by someone else, he wouldn't fully realize the truth until much later. It certainly is a very dark origin story for Domino's power, but at what cost? I mean, that kind of resentment would really boil up to serve a better purpose later on, but for the most part, people didn't care for this Marvel mutant. In at number 8, Cyclops. Scott Summers had all of the potential to become a great leader and overall favorite for fans. However, after a string of promiscuous behavior and questionable decisions, that image completely flipped. He quickly went from hero to the most hated member of the X-Men. I suppose you could say his backlash moment for fans was when he chose to marry Madeline Pryor. Not only was she a twin for his ex Jean Grey, but she was forced to raise their child alone. Cyclops started a family and then just would bail constantly to fight a supervillain. What made people hate him further was when Storm got involved. Storm confronted Scott about his lack of parenting, and in response he challenged her to a duel that he lost. And not only that, the guy lost his spot as team leader, but he gained a spot on our list. Comment F to pay respects to Scott Summers, please. In at number 6, Kamala Khan. Kamala first appeared as an unnamed cameo in Captain Marvel Volume 7, issue number 14. She was an awkward yet endearing Pakistani-American teenager. Also, she just so happened to be the first Muslim character to headline her own Marvel comic series. Kamala had appealed to readers beyond the regulars at comic book shops. In fact, the writer G. Willow Wilson cracked the New York Times bestseller list with this comic book 4 times since Ms. Marvel's 2014 debut. From there, she went on to become an Avenger, a playable video game character, and even an animated cartoon. Although alt-right activists were outraged by Marvel's decision to include a Muslim character into the roster. On top of that, during an interview with the BBC, Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige said that a Kamala Khan film was in the works, just stoking the flames even more. In at number 5, Wolverine. Wolverine is a mutant who possesses animal keen senses, enhanced physical capabilities, a powerful regenerative ability, and 3 retractable claws in each hand. So what backlash could this iconic character possibly get? I'm glad you asked. In X-Men number 7, the writers insinuated that there may be a relationship involving Cyclops, Wolverine, and Jean Grey. They build this polyamorous relationship between them, but often show Scott and Logan spending time alone together. Although they did nothing explicitly on the comic book pages, it was a small hat tip to the LGBTQ community, and it rattled the Comicsgate people. One account tweeted, a hashtag SJW cannot create anything original that consumers want because they are consumed with the evil of virtue signaling, so now they have made one of the most legendary comic book characters of all time, hashtag Wolverine, gay. If that isn't evil, I don't know what is anymore. That tweet is evil. Who cares? Who cares if Wolverine likes boys? I'm sorry. In at number 4, Be Negative. When Marvel announced their new Warriors, the internet was absolutely outraged. But oddly enough, it was coming from all sides. Both the woke and red-pilled among us sat back with their jaws dropped on just how insane Marvel's new modern social justice warriors were. Although there already was new warriors, so technically they're more like the new warriors.
Be Negative is the goth kid. When he was a baby, he got a rogue life-saving blood transfusion.
Be Negative is a pun on the blood type, which also suits a vampire character, but it also is meant to encourage a bad attitude. The creator, though, focused in on Be Negative representing the life-draining and exhausting negativity on the internet. Kinda weird that that's a superhero. Seems more like a villain. In at number 3, Screen Time. Screentime is the next mutant to join the New Warriors and experience his own form of backlash. Writer Daniel Kibblesmith was attempting to take the negativity out of the term Screentime and flip it into a superpower. Therefore, this New Warrior's big superpower is being connected to the internet at all times. You know, like a Wi-Fi connection. As a youth, he was exposed to his grandfather's experimental internet cast, and that permanently patched him to the World Wide Web. The writers were really trying to take the restrictive nature of the word away, but what many pointed out, and I tend to agree with, by trying to avoid harsh labels, they just made up new ones. I mean, he literally called B negative the goth kid. Plus, Kibblesmith referred to Screentime as an internet kid, taken to his logical conclusion of having unlimited screen time. Don't think too many parents are gonna get behind this one. In at number 2, Trailblazer. Trailblazer was a foster kid that grew up in a group home but was suddenly scooped up into a world of teenage superheroes. Her magic backpack is actually a pocket dimension with seemingly infinite space from which she can pull out useful or random objects, although it's not always under her control. For her bio on Marvel's website, they wrote she claims to get her power from God, but not the God you're thinking of. Why play with religion like that, Marvel? Have you learned nothing? Have you learned nothing? Marvel has yet to reveal the character's ethnicity for fear that she will be judged further. If it turns out that Trailblazer is a Latin American female, well, then they just ripped off Dora the Explorer. But if they go the Native American route, then this story just got even more tragic. Last but certainly not least, in our number 1 spot, Snowflake and SAFESPACE. Snowflake and SAFESPACE were by far the most controversial mutant characters that Marvel had released in quite some time. Again, the writer was attempting to take derogatory labels from the internet and use them as character names who wear these negative terms as badges of honor. The worst part is that Kibblesmith then immediately describes SAFESPACE as a stereotypical jock. Do you see a problem here? He can also create force fields, but he can only use them if he's protecting someone else. So he can't even protect himself. Great hero. Snowflake is actually the first non-binary character in other half of the twin heroes. Snowflake also identifies as they, them, and has the power to generate crystallized snowflake-shaped ninja stars, which, if you ask me, is cultural appropriation. But what do I know? The only positive to these characters was that both liberals and conservatives agree on how much they hate them.
Number 10, Wither. Kevin Ford, or better known as Wither, was a former student of XAVIER's School for Gifted Youngsters. He was a mutant with the power of organic decay, which means basically when he touched any form of organic matter, it would break down the binding forces between the molecules and cause whatever he's touching to wither away. I get his name now. He wasn't really all that great at controlling it though. When he first arrived at the school, he was a bit of a loner, but he eventually made some friends. He was especially close with Laurie Collins, also known as Wallflower. Years later, during the House of M storyline, he touched Laurie's arm and accidentally ended up crippling her. He then decided to run away and was recruited by Selene to fight against the X-Men. Number 9, Bishop. Lucas Bishop, or better known as just Bishop, has a very, very interesting story. You see, his mission was to travel back and to find a traitor in the X-Men and stop this terrible future that he was living in. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, not exactly. After Scarlet Witch wiped out a ton of the mutant population, Hope Summers appeared, and everyone saw her as some sort of mutant messiah. Bishop then realizes that she is partially responsible for the terrible future that he lives in and will stop at nothing to kill her. He even ends up betraying the X-Men, which in turn makes him realize that he is the traitor that he was looking for all along. And instead of killing Hope, he ends up killing Cable. And now, in the future, he is known as a villain. That's pretty crazy. And really messed up. Number 8, Colossus. Colossus is generally seen as a really nice guy. I mean, look how he's portrayed in the Deadpool films. People just absolutely love him. But unfortunately, he has turned to the dark side. He ended up suffering a brain injury, and then shortly after, he lost his sister to something known as the Legacy Virus, which took the lives of a lot of mutants. Because of this, he ends up siding with Magneto for a little while and goes against the X-Men. But he does eventually return to the side of good. But he was evil, which is why he is on this list. Number 7, Gambit. Gambit technically started out as a villain. He was a con man and thief, but he did, eventually become a hero. He's one of the most famous and most popular, of the X-Men. He has been a part of multiple events and stories where he saved the world. But at one point, he did go back to being evil. Not entirely his fault, though. It was kind of, for Apocalypse, which you'll be hearing about more as this list goes on. He became one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen and tried to kill his friends. He didn't stay that way forever, and he rejoined the team later on and has continued to be a crucial part of the team going forward. Number 6, Iceman. In the Age of Apocalypse universe, Bobby Drake, aka Iceman, is not the one we know and love. In the original universe, he's, a nice guy that you could just rely on. He's a crucial part of the X-Men and has saved hundreds of people. But that's not the case in the Apocalypse timeline. This Bobby ends up turning against his team, to the point where he even reveals the location of the X-Men's super secret underwater base to Wolverine, who was also working for Apocalypse at the time. Not cool, Bobby. Not cool. Although he didn't really get away with it. Later on, he ended up being killed by Nightcrawler. So, Number 5, Namor. Namor has a very interesting relationship with people who live on land. And by interesting, I mean it's pretty rocky. He usually is not a fan of them, although he has worked with them, before, and even allowed the X-Men to operate in the ocean. But that hasn't always been the case. He has consistently let his hatred of the land cloud his judgment, to the point where he has had multiple fights with not only just the X-Men, but the Avengers. He also has a lot of beef with Tony Stark, aka Iron Man. The two have had so many fights that I have lost count. Number 4, Cyclops. Usually Scott Summers is a stand-up guy, known as one of the most famous leaders of the X-Men. And when you think of him, evil is not really a word that would come to mind. But it has happened to Scott before. It started during the Schism storyline, where his leadership skills were questioned. He began sending out young mutants on assassination missions, which is kind of weird. And then his leadership, was obviously questioned, leading to a massive brawl with none other than Wolverine. This whole arc led into the Avengers vs. X-Men storyline. In Avengers vs. X-Men, he ended up becoming possessed by the Phoenix Force and he killed Charles Xavier. Of course, that wasn't entirely his fault, since, he couldn't really control it. Number 3, Angel. Warren Worthington III is a mutant, with, you guessed it, wings. He's a proud member of the X-Men, but ended up becoming their enemy, Archangel. He becomes one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen. He did eventually break free from Apocalypse, but the whole encounter really just changed him going forward. Warren was never really the same after that. He has consistently wavered between good and evil, sometimes going back and referring to himself as Angel, and then other times becoming bad and becoming Archangel. Number 2, Wolverine. Wolverine becoming bad isn't really a new thing. I mean, there have been multiple instances in the comics where Wolverine has become evil. During the Age of Apocalypse storyline, where he was one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen, or the time where his body was taken over by a demon and he became Hellfire and caused all sorts of mayhem, or there's even the time where he became a vampire. He also even murdered a kid in the Ultimate Universe. It's just, the list goes on and on. But at the same time, that doesn't take away from how iconic Logan is. He's just this amazing hero and will always stay that way, regardless, if he turns evil sometimes. Number 1, Jean Grey. This is probably one of, if not the most famous story in X-Men history, the Dark Phoenix Saga. Fans adore it. It was this massive, action-packed, heartbreaking event. I mean, it's so popular that they've even tried to make it into 2 movies. Fans weren't really crazy about them, but the fact that it was adapted twice really shows you how popular it is. Jean Grey becomes Dark Phoenix after harnessing the power of the Phoenix Force, one of the most powerful things in the whole Marvel Universe. This tragic tale also does not have a happy ending. I mean, on the one hand, Jean managed to become herself again, but in order for her to save everyone, she had to die, which had massive ramifications on the rest of the team going forward.
Number 10, Spider-Woman. This betrayal is a little more subtle, but it definitely led to some trouble for both characters down the line, so I think it's an important one to mention still. Jessica Drew was in Madripoor with her friend Lindsay and Patch, aka Wolverine. She knew he was Wolverine, and he knew she knew at this point, I believe, but he still went by the alias of Patch because Logan thought he was being oh so sneaky, and he didn't want the world to know that the X-Men were actually alive at the time, even though I feel like anyone that met Patch probably knew it was Wolverine. Jessica had decided to take up a job as the Prince of Madripoor, Prince Baran's bodyguard, but Patch thought it was a bad idea because Baran was a bad guy. At the same time, Jessica was giving Patch grief for working his muscle and getting involved with Tiger, a powerful crime boss in Madripoor. Both felt the other was betraying their own sense of morals and thereby betraying their friendship. So it was kind of a two-way betrayal in these characters' eyes. In the end, Patch was right to criticize Prince Baran as Jessica ended up near death after stumbling upon the Lazarus Project during her shift in the palace and barely escaping with her life. Patch likewise would have a trial ahead as he wrestled with the mysterious Lazarus Project, but he'd forgive Jessica when he found her and help her to get to safety and get much needed medical attention. She was pretty messed up. Don't you hate when that happens? Don't you hate when you stumble upon mysterious projects and then you just get like thrown into a sewer because you're like in such a terrible condition. I know I do. Number 9, Gambit. In this case, Gambit wasn't entirely in control of himself. He was under the influence of the Shadow King, who had possessed him and made him fight against Logan. Wolverine happened to be the one to face off with him. He managed to get the drop on Gambit, defeating him in battle when Wolverine successfully pinned him down. This all happened too after Wolverine had been cut off from the rest of those X-Men who were not influenced by Shadow King, but as Wolverine said while Gambit was busy throwing insults his way, he is one of the best when it comes to winning fights. And regardless of being cut off from support, that is exactly what happened here. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear about more superheroes who have been betrayed, oh no, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Wolverine. Laura Kinney, formerly known as X-23, and Logan have quite the complex past. Laura is basically a genetic female counterpart to Wolverine. Some consider her a clone, and some consider her more a genetic offspring, kind of like Logan's daughter. In reality, she's kind of both, to be honest. When Logan first came across Laura, he realized that she had been brainwashed and wasn't in control of her actions. Able to sympathize, he did his best to free her. She was supposed to go straight to the X-Men basically, but decided to venture out on her own instead, which resulted in her getting in a fight again with Logan next time that he ran into her. However, he was able to not only defeat Laura this time, but also basically talk her down and bring her back with him to the XAVIER Institute, helping her to find a home among the X-Men. And now the two are very close, and I don't think Laura would even consider fighting Logan again unless she had like absolutely no other choice, like if he turned evil or some such thing. But then honestly, she wouldn't be betraying him really, because the Logan she knew would probably like want her to take him out. I feel like he's also the type of guy that's kind of like, you know, I've lived a long life, like I'm kind of fine, but I guess I gotta keep living, bub. Number 7, Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde didn't intend to betray Wolverine. It wasn't really her choice at all. She was brainwashed into doing it by Wolverine's longtime rival and old teacher, Ogun. Ogun was looking to get revenge on Wolverine, and so psychically uploaded a bunch of awesome ninja and martial arts skills to Kitty Pryde's mind, and then sent her to assassinate her mentor, friend, and fellow X-Men, Wolverine. Fortunately, the bond between Logan and Kate was so strong that they were able to work together to defeat Ogun in the end, freeing Kitty but leaving her with an experience which had changed her forever. She returned to X-Men a little more mature and definitely more of a badass. I think she still has all of that like assassin knowledge in her brain as well, taking up the new name for herself for a time at least of Shadowcat. Yeah, it was really more Ogun than Kitty betraying, but even if she was being controlled, it was still her own physical form fighting against Wolverine. And this is a cool story that I just enjoy revisiting, so I saw an opportunity to put it on this list and I was like, I'm gonna do it. So I hope you enjoyed it. Number 6, Mariko. Mariko Yoshida was one of the major loves of Wolverine's life. The two were even engaged to be married, but Mariko, being the good person that she was, wanted to make sure that her family no longer had any criminal ties before the wedding happened, as she was now the head of Clan Yoshida. Unfortunately, before they could get married, Mariko died during her attempt to broker peace between the rival criminal gangs. She ended up going to Hell and would later meet Wolverine there when he was sent to Hell by the Right Red Hand. Or at least, his soul was sent there. His physical form was still on Earth, but it's a whole story. While his soul was there, his suffering would manifest in him being tormented by Mariko, his former love. She didn't want to torment Wolverine, but she pretty much had no choice. Despite this, Wolverine, when he escaped, came back and tried to free her, but Mariko believed she deserved what she got and chose to stay in Hell, refusing to let him save her. I think she felt pretty bad because she was like, I feel like I betrayed you, and also I got stuff to atone for, you know? Number 5, Scarlet Witch. As much as I hate to include someone like Wanda on this list, it kinda has to be mentioned that she technically betrayed all of mutant kind with Decimation and M-Day. Of course, I will still argue that this really only happened because Wanda's mental health was often shafted in her past, and so her kinda snapping after House of M made a whole lot of sense. While Wolverine was still Wolverine, there were a lot of mutants, and I mean a lot, that were affected. The whole community felt this blow, and Wolverine was part of that community, so even though he still had his powers, he was still hurting a lot, I think. I think a lot of mutants were. Also, he was one of the first people to realize what had happened in the House of M reality, and he was not too happy to have a fabricated life made for him and be denied the reality and history that were true to him, no matter how bleak or painful in comparison to the world Wanda had made for him and everyone in an effort to try to make herself, her family, and pretty much all other supers happy. I love how Wanda's like, I just want to give everyone a reality where like we can all be happy, you know? And everyone's like, how dare you? How dare you try to make me happy? Obviously, I feel very bad for Wanda, I think you can tell. Number 4, Professor X. Oh, bub. Professor X for being the head of the Xavier Institute and for being a leader among his own X-Men team who claims to stand for mutant and human harmony and preaches about what it means to be good and be a hero and fight for all of humanity united, has a lot, and I mean a lot, of skeletons in his closet. He has betrayed the X-Men multiple times, Wolverine included. I think mainly this has to do with Professor X choosing to suppress as opposed to acknowledge and deal with his darker side. He put his team in danger when it was revealed that Danger Room was actually sentient and itself a living AI mutant who then pursued the team in an effort to get to Xavier, and also technically came equipped with knowledge on all their weaknesses, by the way. Danger Room is scary. Or just Danger, sorry. Just Danger, that's what the mutant version of Danger Room is called. Additionally, Xavier's repressed negative emotions and his severe punishment of Magneto was what led to the creation of the psychic entity known as Onslaught, which was sort of a blend between those two psyches. You could also argue that even in modern comics, Wolverine has felt betrayed by Professor X. When X chose to allow all mutant villains to come to Krakoa and call it their home, Wolverine was one of the few people to protest, thinking it was a bad idea that would inevitably backfire. I guess we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Although I feel like based on Inferno, Wolverine may have been right here. Number 3, Hulk. The Hulk has always been a rival of Wolverine's, despite the fact that both of them are heroes. In fact, Wolverine made his first appearance in Incredible Hulk issue 180, where he fought against him. Hulk has dropped in to fight Wolverine a few times in the comics, and sometimes does so just to prove that I guess he's the strongest between them. Although it doesn't always end that way. In fact, quite a few times their fights have actually ended more in a tie than anything. Some of Hulk's other personas, like Joe Fixit, have also gotten involved with Wolverine, and even when Fixit has meant well, there is an animosity between these two that generally leads to Fixit causing more trouble for Logan during their adventures. This is usually because they each have their own approach to dealing with problems and with baddies. Although, I guess, to be fair, it seems that the Hulk usually also feels betrayed, which is what leads to their fighting. But even the slightest thing can set him off, so these betrayals are usually just from some like small remark that Wolverine has made. So in the end, I always feel like Wolverine is more betrayed by the Hulk because he's just like said something offhand, and then the Hulk's like, now we have to fight. It's like, whoa. Breathe, it's okay. Number 2, Magneto. Sure, Magneto was a villain when this one happened, but he also joined up with the X-Men only to turn on them later, and vice versa. It's happened a lot. Magneto might, in general, be thought of as a villain because of his iconic classic appearances in the Fox X-Men films, as well as the X-Men 90s animated series and in the classic comics, but he's really more complex than just being a villain. In fact, currently in the comics, he's more of a hero, I'd say. However, that doesn't change his history with Wolverine, who is understandably a little less likely to trust former villains turned heroes because of history like this. Magneto is the one responsible for ripping the adamantium right out of Wolverine's skeleton back in the day, which was insanely painful and left Wolverine in a more feral state for a good long period in the comics. He also lost his nose because of this, and this all went down after Magneto had been acting more heroically in the comics, working with the X-Men on behalf of Charles Xavier in his absence. In fact, Magneto was like the leader of the X-Men then, so if you want to be like, but he's a villain, he was definitely a hero and then he went back to being a villain. He felt like other people were betraying him. The tension between the two characters has remained ever since, and even shows up in the current X books, despite them both residing in harmony on Krakoa. Magneto only ranks a little lower here because he is so iconically a villain in many folks' minds still, but to me, he's a hero. Number 1, Cyclops. Cyclops has betrayed Wolverine multiple times in the comics. Probably one of the biggest betrayals happened either when the two couldn't agree and so created their own X-Men teams separate from one another, each believing their view on young mutants and how to train and teach them was superior, or when Cyclops recruited Wolverine's female clone / genetic daughter her onto the Black Ops mutant team X-Force against his wishes. Laura, aka X-23, aka now Wolverine, had just recently escaped those who saw her only as a weapon and a tool to be used, a deadly killing machine, which was exactly why Wolverine did not want her on the X-Force team. But Cyclops saw how useful she could be and felt that if she was willing to join, then it didn't really matter what Logan thought. Wolverine evidently disagreed with his outlook. He disagreed quite strongly.